All right, well, maybe we're live. We shall see. And it doesn't. There we go. All right. Now, if I'm really lucky, I will find our chat box. And this is always a challenge. It magically appears on occasion. So we're going to get started in about 8 minutes, and if we're really lucky, I will find the chat. Stream setup, graphics, nope, mosquito. Ah. I am being attacked. So either that or I'm hallucinating, one of the two. Alright, there's that. Let's just make that bigger. That is not what I want. No. Well, if you're joining us, yay. But I'm going to get started in just a few minutes whilst I once again try to figure this foolishness out. We will get started right at 6 o'clock. At least I think that's what time we start. I know it's on here. I don't want to poll. I want to chat. That might be it. All right, we're going to find out. There we go. All right, I think I found, oh, hey. Yay, live bodies. Hey, Maureen. I actually found the chat, so hopefully I will keep up. And I may be doing this one by myself, and I'm being attacked by mosquitoes for some strange reason, so we'll see how it goes. We're going to get started right here, right at 6 o'clock. I have no idea what time it is in Denver. And feel free to post any questions you might have, and I will add them to the queue. All right. I'm making my list and checking it twice. Oh, it's 4 there. Okay. Well, hopefully you're not playing hooky from work. Right now, I guess I don't need to do that. All right, I'm going to try to keep up because I think I got it myself tonight. We'll see who else shows up here in the next few. And then I will babble incoherently. What else was I covering tonight? Yeah, I got 4 minutes. And let me know if you got any questions, Maureen, or anybody else who's hiding on there. It's so funny, it never really has the right number of people who's in here. But feel free to type in a question, and I will add it. Huh. All right. That's a good one. We will definitely, I might lead off with that. If anybody's joining us, we're going to get started here in just a few moments. Feel free to let us know where you're from, say hi, so we know you exist, and feel free to post any questions, and we're going to get started right at 6. All right, I got it. We can talk for days about that, Maureen. That's probably the most interesting one I've got for the night so far. Well, you never know what'll happen. How do? What's going on, Kristen? See, I was going to say, I didn't get any questions from you. All right, I like that one. You got good ones, Maureen. All right. I got that marked right. Okay. We'll see if my brain holds up. I just got off paddling on the river all day today, so hopefully I'm not too dehydrated. I think my brain's functioning today. All right, we're counting down. If anybody's just jumping on, please let us know where you're from, who you are, and post any of your questions in the chat. I am going to do my very best to keep up with the chat as we go. I'm sure it'll pick up as we go along. Oh, see, I'm chatting. It's not technically 6 o'clock yet. Fine, I'll wait one more minute. I'm impatient sometimes. All right, now it's officially 6 o'clock. Yay, now I can talk twice as fast. Hey all, I'm Bob Linde from the Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida. And, well, at least the two people I know are in here are not here. And I'm hoping that we get a few people who we actually said come to the classroom if anybody wants to sit in on the madness that is the open forum. And I know both of you have been here before, so I'm not going to say a whole heck of a lot, other than you can find out more about our classes at traditionsherbschool.com or acuherbals.com if you're more interested in an herb consult with a clinical herbalist or to see one of our acupuncture physicians. Or for anybody where price is an issue, we've 3 nights a week. We've got acupuncture interns and both Western and Chinese herbal interns for a reduced rate. And for anybody who can't sit in on the whole thing or misses it altogether, you can, I'll upload this to YouTube at the Traditions School of Herbal Studies YouTube page, where we have the last almost a year, maybe longer, of all of these open forums, which I think are just a ridiculous thing of me downloading information for everybody to share. And it's funny, I watch other people's stuff as well. And I get paranoid because I don't say, nothing that I say constitutes medical advice. You should consult your licensed medical professional if you have a serious medical condition. And ultimately, I would say, go see an herbalist. But now that I've got the legalities out of the way, I don't know that that protects me from anything. But that's okay. I feel better now that I said it. None of this is approved by the FDA, and that means it's better. No. So this is one of those opportunities. We do this on the last Friday of every month, and I plan to continue that even though we've come out of COVID, or if you're in Florida, COVID never existed. And it's an opportunity for me to connect with people that I don't normally connect with, who have left the area, like Kristen. And I'm going to give a selfless plug. I was super excited. I literally just got a text message from one of our practitioners, as well as one of the other teachers here at the school, Ruth, and she was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to be teaching at the American Herbalist Guild conference in October up in Maryland." And I hadn't checked my email because I'd been out on the river, and I was like, "Oh my God, I applied as well, so hopefully I got to teach as well." And I was super happy that I'm also teaching. So Tampa Bay is taking over the American Herbalist Guild conference, as it should be. But I didn't ask her yet what she's going to be teaching, but I'm going to be teaching about poop. So that was literally the type of, what does our poop tell us? So I'm going to be talking about poop diagnosis and the energetics of poop, and why everybody should. My students are horrified when I tell them that you should look down inside a porta potty to look at all the different types of poop. And obviously, if you're out at a random event, it's very, very frightening. And I was recently out at the Earth Skills, the Florida Earth Skills Convergence or something like that. And some of the healthiest poop I've ever seen was in those porta potties. It was really impressive, but if you're into conferences, and for both herbalists and acupuncturists, I always say for acupuncturists, you should go to the herb conferences. They're sometimes more informative than some of the acupuncture conferences. I feel like the acupuncture conferences don't often raise the bar. There's a few standout practitioners always. But I always feel like they don't give enough information on herbs, and they don't push the envelope and integrate enough stuff into them. Where I find the Western Herb conferences are just a wealth of information that I constantly learn from, and I find new exciting teachers from the herb conferences as well. And we've got one coming up really soon, Medicines of the Earth, which is in Black Mountain, North Carolina. I'm not sure if the early bird deadline is passed yet or not. I forgot to check it tonight. I'm not lecturing at that one, but I always go because it's super fun and it's a beautiful place. And I have to admit, I like going hiking as much as I like seeing old friends and teachers. And hopefully one of these days they'll ask me to teach there if you're listening. And from there, I've got a new one I'm going to, which is in Colorado. I have never been to this conference. I don't know if you can see that. This is the Good Medicine Convergence. You can find out more at planthealer.org. Good Medicine Confluence, excuse me. This is in Durango, Colorado. I'm super jazzed to be going to this one. I think I'm teaching like 4 or 5 classes, so I'm taking over. And this is July 28th through the 31st. I forget whether they actually decided to extend it. Hey, Tiffany, Insulin Resistance. Oh, awesome. And then, of course, my most favorite one of the year always is the American Herbalist Guild in October. And, I better make a plug for FSOMA. In August here in Florida, but we invite people from all over the country or the world, is the Florida State Oriental Medicine Association. FSOMA has their conference near Orlando, and I think I'm teaching 2 classes at that, so I'm super excited about that. I hate to say it, I don't remember what I'm teaching, but I think one is cool herb stuff, and I think the other one is something different. I don't really remember, but I seem to remember it was a different thing. It was not less herbal than I usually teach. It was a little bit more functional medicine. Somebody's got to do it. And American Herbalist Guild. And I think one of the best things about American Herbalist Guild, besides all the things that are awesome about that organization, is that it changes location every year. And so challenging for AHG, but they're really trying to make it as accessible to people throughout the U.S. And it also means I get to visit cool new places every time. And so we had it once down here in St. Pete, and I'm hoping we get it down here again. I'm poking them with a stick periodically and telling all of my students to harass them endlessly to get it back in St. Pete, since we have so many members down here and well, at least 2 teachers. So with no further, and I got to say, lots of classes coming up. I totally didn't bring the class schedule. There's the ongoing anatomy and physiology for the herbalist. We've got the Ayurvedic series. I think that next one is coming up on brain stuff. It's coming up next Thursday or the week after. I honestly don't remember which. I believe our 101 is closed. And and then we've got the medicine making series, as well as the herb series, where Ruth, I'm super jealous, spends like 2.5 hours talking about a single herb. Like she just did wild violet, and I don't honestly remember what the next one is, but it's always interesting. We always get rave reviews about that one. And we've got, of course, the Green Thumb Festival is coming up in just a couple of weeks, and in the first Saturday in May, if you are anywhere near the St. Pete area, it's National Herb Day, and we will have our usual extravaganza with, I think we're actually full on vendors, which is a first. We've got close to 25 vendors, 2 different musical acts, and ongoing lectures in both our student tents, which seems to be more popular than the practitioner, the seniors tent. So I'm sure we'll have a great lineup of classes, and as always, our students will be there with all of their medicine on display and available for purchase so they can pay for more classes with me. No, I'm just kidding. All right, let's get into this. Actually, I'm going to go right to Maureen's because it's a really interesting question, and it raises some of the It's one of the things I've talked about a lot. Not everybody's always, I guess my students have heard me rant about the shou gin, and basically that's an alcohol extraction of shou, which is Polygonum multiflora, I think. But shou, it's a Chinese herb. It grows a little too well here, at least in Florida. I don't know about elsewhere in the country or in the world. I always tell the joke, it's if you're going to grow shou here in St. Petersburg, you should put it in a large pot and put a metal plate underneath it and put it on concrete. I spent almost 2 years trying to eradicate it from my yard because it started to eat my house. It made kudzu look lazy. So it's a beautiful plant. It's a beautiful vining plant, and it's used a great deal. The story of shou translates roughly as Mr. He's black hair, and I'll give the synopsis of the story. That Mr. He was no good, layabout bum. That he was lazy, exhausted, graying hair before its time, couldn't father any children with his wife, and was over drinking lout. And one night he drank too much, passed out into the forest. He woke up and he found these vines that were twining as it climbed up a tree, and he had a vision, also known as a hallucination, and grabbed up this plant and stumbled off into a cave and came out a year later, and his gray hair was now black. He was vibrant and vital and fathered many children and went through many wives and lived to be 228 years old or some foolishness like that. And although I don't promise all of that from some shou, I can safely say that my mom in her late 70s stopped dyeing her hair. And one of my running things is don't treat family, so I wasn't treating her. One of the other practitioners in our clinic was treating her, and somehow talked her into boiling up raw herbs on a daily basis. And one of the chief herbs in there was actually shou. And after a couple of months of drinking this decoction every single day, she was at her hairstylist in her now all white hair. She goes, "Shirley, what's going on? You've got some black roots coming in." And although it was never this perfect black hair, there is no doubt I have now seen multiple cases of the long-term use of shou actually creating reverting back to their natural color somewhat. Now, all of that said, the question we actually had was, would shou be helpful or harmful for somebody who had already recovered from COVID but was still fatigued? And, there's a couple of questions with that. There's many reasons for fatigue, and there's not actively sick from COVID, and then the controversial long COVID, where people have kind of all of the symptoms of fatigue being the greatest one that's post-COVID that seems to not be common. For some reason, it's somewhat debated as to whether it exists, but I think we've seen a variety of long-term detrimental effects of people who've even recovered very quickly from COVID, but anything from the loss of smell to change in heart rate, fatigue is huge, and any number of other interesting symptoms that they've had. And there isn't, I wish I could say there was a single symptom or a single approach that I use when I see somebody with long COVID or just fatigue in general. And what it always comes down to is the, shou is a Chinese herb, and ensuring that we have an appropriate Chinese diagnosis. And when we look at shou, it tends to nourish the blood in yin, and a lot of books will say it nourishes the jing. And I struggle with that. I don't know. The story is lovely, and I don't know anybody who's living to be 150 or more years old because they take shou. That said, when it matches the overall diagnosis of either blood or yin deficiency, it really can be tremendous. And it's not energizing. It's not a stimulant. We're not going to take a shou capsule and stay up all night and party down. This is something that's most appropriate long term. And it's probably one of those prime examples where it's used for fatigue, but if you are fatigued from spleen qi or kidney qi deficiency or kidney yang or spleen yang deficiency, where you're for the Western herbalists, a deficient, lax, tending towards cold condition with a puffy tongue, with a white tongue coating, loose stools, then shou would be a poor choice. Because for anybody with weak digestion or qi or yang deficiency, shou tends to be very moistening and focuses on the blood and yin. And so it will actually cause fatigue. And cause loose stools, and nobody enjoys running to the toilet 10 times a day. So we find it's most helpful for the blood or yin deficiency. And with blood deficiency, we're going to tend towards constipation. It'll be a drier stool. They'll tend to be cold. So we have two deficient cases, both cold. One qi deficiency with a puffy, flabby tongue and loose stools. One with blood deficiency, a thin, pale tongue, feels cold, but a dry stool tending towards constipation. We say with blood deficiency, and that may be the same as anemia, not always. With blood deficiency, we say pale, 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 pale. It's pale nails, pale face, pale eyes, pale lips, pale tongue, and a very thin or minute pulse. With yin deficiency, and this does still translate somewhat into Western herbal medicine as well, we have a lack of the cooling, moistening, nourishing fluids. And this will appear as sometimes a type of heat condition, and what we would call deficiency heat. And people will have a malar flush, so it's red here, but not the whole face. The pulse may be rapid. The tongue will be red with ideally no coat. We'll see cracks or fissures in the tongue, and what we call 5-center heat, where the hands, feet, and center of the chest, or some of those, will be warm to the touch. But you can oftentimes, like when you're taking the pulse, you feel the hand and it feels warm, but their arm just below the wrist will actually feel normal to cold. And we'll also see constipation in a case like this. So I would say the he shou might be helpful. I generally don't use it as a single, although it is one of the few herbs in Chinese medicine that's used as a single. I prefer it in formula, looking at an overall constitution for folks. But if there's already loose stools, I wouldn't go near it. It will actually make them heavy, phlegmy, and cause fatigue more often than not. Now let me come back around. So the actual form that you were asking about, I actually caution against, even though there's a long history of an alcohol extraction, and that's a classic brand, the shou. You can find that. Sorry, my feet are being eaten alive by mosquitoes. Oh my God. The shou is an alcohol extraction that you can frequently get at Asian markets and so forth. I know we have them here in St. Pete, and very common in China and throughout Asia. There were a number of reports. I'm going to guess at about 10 years ago. I'm bad with time frames, where they were finding some liver enzyme elevation and severe that seemed to be related to he shou. And as they continued to explore that, the majority of them were from an alcohol extraction, specifically the shou. And I've never found enough follow-up about that as to whether it was some impurities in the alcohol, which wouldn't be out of the question, whether it was an adulteration, that it wasn't actually he shou or it was not processed properly, whether these were unique cases. But I saw a number of people who I respect commenting that this was not an isolated one or two cases, that there were enough cases of it to warrant some investigation and caution. But more importantly, whether the using alcohol as the extraction process was perhaps pulling out a constituent that is not normally consumed if you're doing a water extraction, i.e. a decoction. So I generally discourage people until I find out more, until somebody can tell me better, or I find the research. I generally steer people away from alcohol extractions of he shou. And in any case, when you've got somebody with fatigue, we see a specific onset of the issue, that they had great energy, they caught COVID, they recovered from COVID, now they're dragging their butt around and not getting out of bed. At the very least, some basic blood work to ensure that their B12 levels are adequate. And I believe you said it was a guy, so I would say less common that guys will have low iron, but it is a possibility, and I'll talk briefly about that. And a lot of times when you say, oh, can you check the iron, the doctors just do a ferritin level. And so, and sorry, I'm typing fast and thinking at the same time, I tend to ask for a full duration, sorry, that's not spelled right, whatever, TIBC and ferritin. So I ask for all of those. And in a perfect world, when they test the B12, they do an MMA, which is a more accurate level of B12. Those are both very common reasons for fatigue. And anything from, if they were for some reason given an antibiotic for a viral disorder, which isn't out of the question, that it destroyed their gut flora, or the stress of the illness shut down their digestion, lowered their stomach acid, and now they're seeing a inability to absorb certain minerals or B12 because of low stomach acid. So that's not very Chinese of me, but I would say yes, do your good Chinese medicine or Western herbal energetic diagnosis with tongue, pulse, and other symptoms. The low ferritin is a form of iron, and so it can be either, we see that either in people who have poor absorption or in vegans that we'll see that's frequently low. I'm usually more, you can get iron from vegetables, but you are challenged to get B12 from vegetables. So I always say anybody who is vegan should supplement with B12. But if you're eating meat, then I would say, why aren't you absorbing your iron properly? Why aren't you absorbing your B12 properly? And there's any number of disorders that can throw your iron and ferritin levels off. But I would ensure a doctor checks all of those iron-related levels, not just the ferritin. With the COVID, it's very common if they did any kind of medical treatment for COVID, that there's side effects from that, from gut dysbiosis, that they've put out their digestive fire. Some of the ivermectin, things like that, I found are very drying and cold, so that may actually cause some other issues. And it's funny not to talk about my class in AHG, but I would really, the tongue and the poop are going to be the biggest things as to whether or what kind of an approach we take with that, and looking at that full overall picture and coming up with a clear understanding of the imbalances, ignoring the word COVID, and either through blood work and extensive blood work if necessary, but more importantly, looking at that hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, tense, and lax, or 8 principles in Chinese medicine to get your best approach to that. And I don't know if that was helpful or not, Maureen. That may be more information than you want about He Shou Wu. And hopefully I've answered your question. It's all about the poop, ultimately. And I'm going to, did I write that down? Oh, yeah, there I did. Sorry, and I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to jump over to Tiffany's here. My approach to insulin and insulin resistance, and let's just talk about what that is for a moment. So it's funny, I couldn't make it to the class that Tricia, our school director and the ever so awesome person who teaches our anatomy and physiology for the herbalist, decided to add an extra class in that was more about blood work. It was just this past Thursday night. I guess that was yesterday. Man, life's a blur sometimes. And she went through just the basic CBC, complete blood count, and the CMP, I thought it was complete metabolic panel, but it's cardiometabolic panel. See what I learned, I literally jumped on the online to listen in on it. Hopefully I didn't freak her out by listening in. But really just super basic and useful information about understanding that basic blood work. And she had some statistics that I'm sorry I can't spout off, but it was over 80% of people had metabolic disorders related to sugar and insulin that was quickly leading that towards the diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And depending on who you ask, basically if you eat anything vaguely in the ballpark of the standard American diet, and even some of us who pretend to be eating healthier, that we are dealing with insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome. It's funny, it's sometimes called Syndrome X, and as we start to move into the type 2 diabetes, we also even see type 3 diabetes, where we don't see the classic elevated insulin levels, but we see an inflammatory response in the brain. And there's a couple of different ways to think about what insulin resistance even looks like. Easy way is, looking at the fasting glucose for somebody. And it's funny, I literally, depending on what lab you go to, the numbers vary. I generally say that if you are over 100, you might as well consider yourself diabetic. And I look at that, and I've heard people say as low as 95 to 100 is insulin resistance. I tend to only harass people at the 99, 98 range. But a more accurate measure is the A1C, and A1C levels, which gives you a better idea of how not just that day was or that morning is, but it gives you a better idea of what your blood sugar has been over the last 3 months. And I would say, I think it's 5 points above 5.7, you're considered diabetic. And I would say if you're dancing at 5.6, you have one more bowl of ice cream and you might push that over. So I would say as we walk that line that we were like, I haven't magically crossed this line, consider that you are insulin resistant. And I would argue that you should act as if you're diabetic. Let's not wait until we can actually put that label on and have an MD medicate you for it. So the idea of insulin resistance is that our pancreas, and it's just fun to say, the islets of Langerhans, I just feel like a good Scotsman, is secreting through those specialized pancreatic cells, secreting insulin in order to either allow our body to utilize the glucose and the energy of the cells in the mitochondria, or to store it as fat. And that's kind of the role of insulin, is to do one or the other. And if we eat too much sugar, or if we eat too much of things that break down into sugar, more than our body can handle, that are more than our cells need in order to maintain their normal functions, the cells start to shut down and not accept any more of it. And we see all of the symptoms of diabetes except for the numbers. We'll see inflammation, and we can actually look at what is it? C reactive. We can look at I obviously can't type, but C-reactive protein is another test that we can ask a doctor to do, or you can order these tests on your own, and it shows the inflammatory response. And so the problem with insulin resistance or diabetes is that our body becomes inflamed. Our blood no longer is able to nourish those places where we get microcirculation. And whether it's insulin resistance or diabetes, we see vision diminishes because our eyes literally one blood cell at a time, the microcirculation to the heart, and the microcirculation in the kidneys. Those tend to be, and we see it in our extremities, our hands and feet. So I see lots of people who are, weight may or may not be an issue. Lots of thin people can have insulin resistance. So obesity and overweight is not a good way to judge if somebody's insulin resistant or diabetic, but more how their body is reacting to the sugar and the types of symptoms. So I usually look for that borderline blood sugar, fasting blood sugar, or the borderline A1C. We'll see an excess amount of refined carbohydrates, fruit and fruit juices, or sugar, just mainlining sugar with lots of latte yumminess. And they're using sugar for their energy, and it's doing less and less. So they'll be complaining of fatigue, diminished vision, frequent urination. A lot of times there'll be some abdominal fat, not elsewhere. And the cholesterol starts to go up, specifically the LDL, the low density lipoproteins, and the VLDLs, the very low density lipoproteins. And there's frequently a decrease in exercise that goes along with that. So what the heck do we do with it? Stop eating crap. That's easy to say and hard to do. I always treat food and sugar as an addiction, and whether that's I hate to say it, our country makes it okay to push a cookie on people, but not okay to push cocaine on people. And I would say they're similar, that as a culture we have food issues and food addiction. Not always. There's many types of food issues. Everybody thinks about anorexia and bulimia, but I believe the physical addiction as well as the emotional addiction to sugar is a very real and epidemic issue, and it is because of everything from just habituation, but also the way advertising's given to us. And there's things, obviously Coca-Cola in the schools isn't helpful, but we literally hear about infants being given Coca-Cola, and we wonder why 14-year-olds are actually not what used to be called juvenile diabetes, actually have adult onset diabetes as teenagers. That literally they're putting Coca-Cola in their water bottle, or in their what should be their breast milk bottles. So changing behaviors is probably the hardest aspect of it. We have to look at both aerobic and anaerobic exercise. Go out and walk, swim, Tai Chi, yoga is nice aerobic exercise. It burns off some of those excess sugars. It makes it so we're utilizing things appropriately. But increasing the muscle mass through anaerobic exercise, weightlifting, isometrics, and so forth, can actually increase our muscle mass, and that requires more energy. So the body has to do some basic maintenance to those muscles even when you're at rest, and it's a subtle amount of increased consumption of those sugars that we ingest. And we all ingest, if you eat a carrot, you just took sugars. If you eat beans and lentils, you had sugars. So there's not all sugars are alike. It's when we have white rice instead of actual rice that takes 55 minutes to cook, that it's an issue. And I try to get people to think like diabetes now rather than waiting, trying to create those behaviors and food, better choices with their food, that eating around the perimeter, eating whole foods, making sure that we get satiation through fat rather than through the carbohydrates. As herbs go, there are certainly herbs that are well known to help with blood sugar, to reduce insulin resistance, and we can get supplementation that throws all of those in there. They're basically similar or the same ones that we utilize with diabetes. We just use them in slightly lesser amounts. I tend to look at the pattern, so again, looking at energetics for all of that. But some of my favorites to look at are, and I can type, really, there we go. I think B vitamins are vital. So not just B12, but all of the B vitamins. The B12 helps with processing things, and B6 helps with reduce a lot of the inflammation, and all the other Bs do good stuff as well. I oftentimes will look to see if we have a thick tongue coating, if there's acid reflux and things like that. There may be low stomach acid and the creation of a gut dysbiosis. SIBO has been showing up more than I hadn't even heard of it 10 years ago, and in the last few years it's been exponential. The hardest thing is finding somebody to give a SIBO test. And what I find is the SIBO, small intestinal bowel overgrowth or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, I think bowel overgrowth is more correct, because sometimes it's fungal or yeast. And what I find is that it makes you crave sugar. It's almost like you're possessed with an entity that is making you eat donuts. It's what, Homer Simpson is possessed by a SIBO monster. And in that constant craving, because it's trying to stay alive, and unfortunately it's doing it inside your bowels, just where your stomach and small intestine, so where they meet. And so I find the low stomach acid is kind of a precursor to that. So looking to make sure there aren't symptoms of that showing up. As a general rule, I'm going to use bitter herbs. And I know that sounds odd, but the bitter herbs tend to be helpful for blood sugar and insulin resistance. I'm a huge fan of bitter melon, and there are two types. There's the Caribbean bitter melon, where we use the leaves as medicine. That's here in Florida, the Caribbean. And then the Chinese bitter melon, where we use the fruit more. And the fruit, that warty-looking cucumber thing, which if you come to Herb Day, you'll get some, is considered food. Like, yes, we can put it in a capsule or in a decoction, but it's chopped up and made into a stir fry. And so we can use the medicine as part of our food, and so we get filled, we get satiation, and it seems to really help from a number of different ways our blood sugar. I also really like the Ayurvedic herb Genema sylvestre, Gumar, the destroyer of sugar, my only Sanskrit word I know. I think Gumar sounds cool. And that one, it's an odd one, and I don't do it without permission from the client, but it makes sugar and sweet things taste funny. And so without a doubt, and I'm sure all of us have experienced the yumminess of sugar. And, although you may not feel great after eating a donut or a piece of pie or something like that, there is a certain emotional component to that. And if we and flavor component of that. And so if we take away the flavor part of it, that tastes yummy, we're less likely to consume it more. And so once I get the client's buy-in to add that into their formulation, I look at where, like, I eat really healthy for breakfast, lunch, actually even dinner. Usually it's my late night snacks. So if I'm at student clinic until 10 or 10:30 and I've kind of like just pushed through, I get home, I'm a little amped up and I need to wind down, and I'm usually a little hungry that late at night. And let's just say my choices are not always the healthiest, and it's probably the worst time we could eat really unhealthy stuff. And it's not horrendous. I don't pull out a chocolate cake and start chowing down, but I might throw an organic frozen pizza in the oven and eat more than one slice of it. Or popcorn is my late night favorite. That's definitely not my friend for many reasons. And so if I know that I have a particular time, if it's after dinner, if it's late night, I try to take the Genema sylvestre about 15 minutes prior to that time of weakness, and then it has kind of that negative reinforcement. Like when I go and get the popcorn, it won't taste good. So I'll push it away. I won't put my face in the feed bowl and chow down. So I think it's important that we look at the uniqueness of that. I tend to follow a lot of, if they're like, I just want a pill, we can give them a million things, but I do like a lot of what they do in Chinese medicine. We look at shou is wasting, thirsting. It's how we describe diabetes in Chinese medicine. And so, sorry, I didn't actually finish my thought because I'm ADD. Shou Wan is kind of, hey, Brandy. See, it's when students bring in those things like chocolate cake that's really my downfall. But shou is a very modern formula. It's basically a bunch of herbs that have been shown to help with blood sugar. I do it. So the insulin resistance diet and lifestyle is the best choice. Making sure the gut is healthy. In Chinese Ayurvedic medicine, we look at food, the energetics of food a lot, and we look at the different flavors of the flavor. We don't, what is it, umami, we don't even bother to talk about, that gets too confusing. But if we just look at sweet, salty, bland, sour, and bitter as those primary flavors or tastes, and we associate those with different organs, and we can associate energetics with those. It's funny, when I was in acupuncture school, I was super lucky. All my teachers were PhDs from China, and I must have been the biggest pain in the butt as a student, because I still believe that food is our best medicine. That, if we generally get off our butts and walk occasionally, and eat a generally healthy and diverse diet, we don't even need herbs, much less medications. And I really glommed onto the idea, I always had, even before acupuncture school, this idea of how do we find herbs, or how do we find food that is also medicinal, or how do we add herbs into our food and still having yummy food. If we look at so many of our carminatives, our nice digestive herbs, like those are yummy. So if somebody who has bloating or gas and poor digestion, like who doesn't want to put all those carminative herbs? Fenugreek and fennel are lovely food medicines. And so I was, in Chinese medicine, I was like, okay, what do you do in China? What foods do you incorporate? And the Chinese do incorporate a lot of food medicine and herbs into their foods and so forth. So I was a real pain in the butt. And what I found, and I punch people who do this to me, and yet I did this to all my teachers. I don't punch them, I'm kidding. That I wanted to see what they were eating, on the assumption that, of course, they're perfect, right? And none of us are perfect. We all do things that are not in our best interest on occasion. And so what I found was that many of them were being very conscientious of their food. The proportion, they would try to have all of those flavors on their plate with every meal, and they would alter the proportions of their food based on their own imbalances. So when I think about the Western diet, we only have two flavors in Western culture. That's sweet and salty. That's our potato chips and with extra salt, and all of the cake. And so it means that those organs, the liver and heart, and according to Chinese medicine in particular, are not being they're not in balance, because we don't incorporate enough of the bitter and sour into our diet. And so when I think about how do I help with that insulin resistance, I sometimes, rather than saying stop eating this and you have to eat that, because that certainly anybody who has a diagnosable eating disorder, that can be huge triggers for them, and not always, it can really be detrimental to put value judgments on food, that this is bad and this is good. But I try to get them to move from too much in this direction and move them more in this other direction, and doing that by incorporating more bitter and sour foods into their diet can make a dramatic change for them. And so rather than saying you have to go on the keto diet, you have to go on the GAPS diet, there's all of these very restrictive, challenging diets. And I always go back to, what did our grandmama do? Not to say that diabetes didn't exist, but they didn't, like, even when I was a kid, we didn't see the rates of diabetes that we see now. And medical care has gotten better, and yet we've gotten less healthy. That, our life expectancy is now diminishing for the first time. That if we don't incorporate better food habits, it's not medicine that's going to save us, it's food. And I think it came up in Trisha's class last night that the new smoking is sedentary lifestyle, that is as deadly as a pack of cigarettes sitting on our butts all day long. And I hate to say it, what am I doing for the next 2 hours? I'm sitting on my butt. Well, luckily I was canoeing all day, and so maybe I'll be all right. And it's funny, I recently, I think I shared this last month or so, I hadn't gone to a doctor, and I'm not getting any younger here. I went to the doctor. I was like, fine, it's been 10 years. I need some blood work. And I had a few odd symptoms that I wanted to get checked out, from a more medical perspective. And I was kind of shocked. I had a weird genetic disorder called hemochromatosis, which is an increased level of iron, which is, if I was going to get some kind of weird genetic chronic disease, I think I got the best one ever. Because it's one that is treated with leeches and bloodletting. So I got a very ancient disease that literally bloodletting is the right treatment. So I have to go and get siphoned off a pint of blood every month until my levels go back to normal, in which case I'm fine. But part of the inflammation of that, because it hadn't been treated for who knows how long, and I'm not afraid of eating a steak, so that doesn't help my iron levels any. So I actually, as much as I say a vegetarian diet is not always so great for us, I actually would benefit from eating a more vegetarian diet because it's lower in iron than one that incorporates too much red meat, which I occasionally do. So I tend to eat more fish and eggs and chicken, or as often as I'm able to have a healthy vegetarian meal or vegan meal, I actually do that. Sorry, I do digress. So when they first did the blood work and I had them check my iron levels, I had a number of inflammatory markers, like even though I don't eat a lot of crap and I work a lot and constantly moving, my blood sugar was slightly elevated, probably insulin resistance, and my cholesterol was walking the line there, and there was a couple of other things that I was like, wow, that's messed up. And it was hilarious because, of course, the doctor, doing the right thing, said, here, you need all of these medications. And I was like, couldn't I explain all of this because of my elevated iron levels? And she looked at me. She was like, yeah. And I was like, well, why don't we wait and see what happens when I lose a couple of pints of blood, and I'll go for an extra walk and eat one less dessert. And very quickly, all of my levels returned to normal. So when we see insulin resistance, it is very important that we take heed of that. And those borderline fasting blood sugars, the borderline A1C. I think we need to understand, is it diet? In which case, well, let's start moving towards that sour and bitter flavors, adding in some herbs that may be helpful, increasing aerobic and anaerobic exercise, good B complex, magnesium is frequently helpful. And there's some nice supplements out there. Not to say it's the best, but it's the easiest to find no matter where you are, is Jarrow. And it's in every health food store, and so it's easy to find. There are better products. But Jarrow's Glucose Optimizer is a nice, generalized, helpful supplement, especially when you're walking that line, that insulin resistance kind of idea. I think that's my 2 cents worth on all of that. Sorry, hopefully that vaguely answered your question. I think that was Tiffany. I rambled a little bit. So I'm happy to say all my levels are normal and my iron's coming down. So I need to get vampired another time or two. I think I'm going to let some of the acupuncturists at the clinic do some wet cupping. If you don't know what that is, Google it and be horrified. Good. I'm glad to hear it, Tiffany. And somebody asked a question about lysine. So L-Lysine is an amino acid that is very common. I often, it's funny, I sneak a lot of Chinese medicine into everything I say. And I find that in nature, in life, in blood work, in acupuncture points. I find the yin and yang in everything. It's funny, in the very first class, whether you're doing a Chinese program with me or you're going to acupuncture school, it doesn't matter. They're like, daytime is yang, nighttime is yin. And so literally we look at it through the rotation of the earth, the cycles of the heavens, to the generation of new life in plants and animals and humans and everything else, and down to the microcosm of the internal workings of the body. And so we could also do something really simple, that we look at pairings or opposites. It's the same darn thing. So with L-Lysine, we oftentimes compare it to L-Arginine. And one of the most common uses of L-Lysine is for any of the many herpes complex types of viruses. The one everybody shakes a stick at, that 1 in 4 people at least in the U.S. has, is oral or genital herpes. Very, very common. And, technically a sexually transmitted disease, although it's not the only way to get it. It's the most common way. It's the little blisters that can be, like, if you have fever blisters, you've got herpes. You can call it whatever you want, but it is a herpes virus. And if you get painful blisters, it's not limited to the genitals, but it's oftentimes on or around the genitals, and that's genital herpes. But there are over 13 different types of herpes, chickenpox being one of them. So when we talk about shingles outbreaks, that's herpes. So we only talk about these 2, and those have this bad connotation, and we ignore the other 11, many of which are common. It's generally found that L-Arginine, and excess of L-Arginine, can increase outbreaks of any of the herpes, but in particular genital and oral herpes, and that higher amounts of L-Lysine can reduce outbreaks and even prevent them. So there are foods that are high in L-Arginine. Of course, they're all really yummy. L-Lysine containing foods are good, and it's about trying to maintain a balance between those. And I'll spare you the laundry list. You can Google, foods that are high in L-Arginine and see which ones to minimize, and do the same with L-Lysine. But one of the cautions I always give is a lot of your protein supplements, a lot of your bodybuilding supplements, or it's not just men's supplements, but it's usually men's supplements or energy drinks, have extra L-Arginine in them. And so I think it's important that you read your labels for your clients or for yourselves, if you do get herpes outbreaks of any type, to limit the amount of L-Arginine, or try to counterbalance it with L-Lysine. And it's funny, this one, as COVID hit, L-Lysine, there was a lot of unique supplements, a lot of herbs. I talked a lot about vitamin D as a potential to reduce your risk of COVID. And, there was all kinds of other interesting ones that are very controversial. But most of them were about, let's maintain a healthy immune system so that we get a mild case of COVID, or we don't catch it at all in a perfect world. One that didn't get a lot of play in that conversation was L-Lysine. And so it has a role, not a well understood role, in our immune system. In particular, it seems to decrease viral replication, i.e., viruses reproduce, and it turns out that COVID reproduces at a really rapid rate. It has it had really unique ways of getting through the lungs into our cardiovascular system and doing weird stuff. And so we're all going to catch some sort of a virus as our days go on. And one of the ways to reduce the severity or to slow the severity of viral infection is with L-Lysine. And it's so funny. I would say I don't bother to take it anymore, although I got a bottle on the shelf. I was very concerned about COVID, mainly because I didn't have time to lose work and time at work seeing clients, but also I was really concerned that I would get COVID and spread it to my clients if I was working on them. And my role is to try to make people better, not to give them a viral disorder. So I was being really paranoid for my own well-being, but also more importantly for other people's well-being. So for quite a while, for most of COVID, and I guess I just got tired of taking it, I was taking lysine once or twice a day, depending on my level of exposure, because ultimately our body will respond to COVID, our body will respond to viral and bacterial infections, but sometimes if the virus is very virulent, it's very aggressive, very strong, and reproduces quickly, our immune system is too slow to catch up, or if for some reason you have a compromised immune system, it's not able to do its job in enough time, and then we get really sick. And we had, obviously, with COVID, lots of people in the hospital, and lots of people, unfortunately, who passed away. And so my reasoning, backed up with nothing other than this is the general idea of L-Lysine, is it slows the replication, and if I can slow it down, whatever that virus is, my immune system has a better chance of responding appropriately and perhaps eradicating or eliminating it. So I'm one of the weirdos. I am not vaccinated, and I've not caught COVID, and I've been exposed to it a number of times, to include clients that I've worked on in very close quarters in a room who went home and the next day tested positive to COVID, and I've never had a cough or a sniffle. No, just kidding. Duck and cover. So it's odd that, is that one of the reasons I also have maintained very good vitamin D levels, and I've maintained, and through COVID as well, I've been taking vitamin C about 2,000 milligrams at least twice a day, morning and evening, and again in a similar kind of idea. Ooh, I didn't even talk about that for insulin resistance. Really interesting ideas with high dose vitamin C spread out throughout the day, specifically for insulin resistance and diabetes. Some of the folks of Linus Pauling believe that diabetes is a type of scurvy, i.e. vitamin C deficiency. And not to say that's been a primary approach to it, but it's an interesting one. So the question was about taking a lysine for an infection. And so for a bacterial infection, I honestly don't know of any risk benefit to it. I'm not sure if it works on bacterial infections. It probably does. For sure, I know that it works on viral infection. And a while back, I had a client that had a myriad of issues. She was literally sent home to die. She was a volunteer at 9/11, first responder, ended up with weird sinus infections. Also ended up with, I forget which herpes virus, and had dyshydrotic eczema. And I forget what it was, but she was starting to get an outbreak. I'll spare all the crazy ass herbal things I did to her. Poor woman. She's still alive, by the way. That was probably 15 years ago. I was working on her, and she was given 6 months to live. But she was about to have some special occasion with a boyfriend. I don't remember whether it was a new boyfriend or just a special occasion. And she was starting to get an outbreak. She was like, dude, you got to do something. I'm not willing to have an outbreak. And so I was like, well, L-Lysine, I gave her some herbs too, but I was like, I don't know how much L-Lysine a person can take. I literally could not find a top end. There were ridiculous amounts. There was numerous research for ridiculous amounts. So I kind of found the middle ground of where the research was and said, well, you can get away with a lot for just 2 weeks. And had her doing, I think, 2,000 milligrams of L-Lysine every 3 to 4 hours, with the classic, if you get loose stools, cut back. And she never got an outbreak. She had a good time on her vacation. Yay. But her dyshydrotic eczema also went away. It went into remission, which was a first. It was something that I have a fairly rare type of eczema. It's oftentimes misdiagnosed. It's only shows up on the hands and on the palms, palmar surfaces of the hands and feet, and really extra crappy. And so since then, I've seen a couple of cases of it, and I use the high dose of L-Lysine for the dyshydrotic eczema. And the other nice side effect of it, lysine is also used for collagen production. So, we sit there and, all of us are aging a little bit and want our skin to be perfect for the rest of our lives. So L-Lysine may have a role in that as well. I'm going to blame genetics for why I don't look my age, but that's about it. So the short answer to how long can you keep taking it? You stop whenever you feel like it. If it's a bacterial infection, I'd actually be curious to know whether it had benefit for that. I've not thought to use it for that, and I haven't researched it for bacterial or yeast infections for that matter. For viral infections, I'd say go for it until you don't need it, or your collagen looks pretty enough. All right. What do we got left here? So, look at that, 7 o'clock. So, yay, there's people on here. So I'm going to take a station identification. I think I told everybody at the beginning, if you're just joining us, I get paranoid because every time I listen to somebody else's podcast or whatever, they're always like, the FDA does not approve any of these treatments or use of these herbs, and none of this constitutes medical advice, blah, 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 blah. Consult a qualified medical professional or an herbalist if you have an issue. So whatever. I sleep better now. Also, please check out all of our myriad of classes for the Tradition School of Herbal Studies at traditionsherbschool.com, or for practitioners, we've got a variety of acupuncture physicians and herbalists in our clinic, as well as our intern clinic for both acupuncture and herbal interns, Western and Chinese. And you can make an appointment to see them at a reduced rate at acuherbals1c.com. And also be sure to check out our YouTube page. There is archived all kinds of crazy herb walks and single plants that I've talked about, as well as I've archived all of these open forums that I've done. And I hope I see you in a class someday soon. And what was that? So I got an interesting, a friend of mine actually sent me, I hate to say it, our usual river that I take our senior Western herbal students on, the canoe outpost that usually runs the Hillsborough River trips, for a variety of reasons, seems to have shut down, and we haven't been able to get in touch with them. And I love the Hillsborough River. I know it like the back of my hand. I know all the cool plants and wild oranges, and there's really unique things out there, and I think just a stunning river. I actually compare it to the Amazon River, the upper branches of the Amazon River, very reminiscent. And so I had to find somebody who rents canoes to try to run this trip in 2 weeks. Excuse me. And nobody rents canoes. They only rent kayaks, and none of them will put in at the Hillsborough River. They have to get a county permit. It's all kinds of silliness that I don't understand. So I found the canoe outpost that's on the Little Manatee River, which I've done once or twice, and I've done different trips on it, and I honestly don't know it very well. So I was like, well, you know what? I got to go and scout the river in case we can't get them to take us on the trip on the Hillsborough. So I went out this morning to scout it, and we had a big rainstorm that came through St. Pete yesterday. And of course, after a cold front comes through, you get a lot of wind. And I was paddling a 17-foot aluminum Grumman canoe by myself today on this 5-mile canoe paddle, and it's a little bit more open than the Hillsborough, so I was getting tossed around a bit by the wind. And halfway through that, at one point where I was literally paddling backwards because the wind was being a pain around one corner, a friend of mine, I don't know whether he's on here tonight or not, sends me a Facebook message with a challenging question to pose to the forum. And he had a friend who's been in a bad accident, and out west, I believe, and is in a coma and non-responsive, and the doctors, and again, I'm getting this third hand, so the doctors are saying if he doesn't come out of the coma, he's probably going to be a vegetable, and won't recover any function whatsoever. And there was two questions: A, what can he do? And B, what experience do I have with it? And I wish we were allowed in hospitals, in ERs and things like that, but herbalists definitely are not yet being welcomed with open arms in a lot of those situations, and I'm going to put a caveat on that. And acupuncturists are for the first time starting to show up in emergency rooms, the emergency departments. That I know of at least 3 hospitals in the nation that have an acupuncturist on staff that works side by side with the emergency room docs. And at first we're kind of beat up for it and like, oh God, you got to go on with that shift with that idiot. But what they found was that they were a wonderful asset in the ER. Obviously, somebody comes in with a gunshot wound or a fracture, there's not a lot we're going to do. You need a trauma surgeon. But when people were having anxiety, when the family members were having anxiety, when people were in pain, when people were going through withdrawal for drugs, that the acupuncturist would do a better job. And so they, after being made fun of for a couple of months, then they started requesting the shifts and asking for more acupuncturists on staff. And so we're really seeing a shift in the acceptability of that. That said, herbalism is not yet well received in those settings. The one exception is the Cleveland Clinic that for a while, and I believe they closed that down, which is very sad. There's actually an acupuncturist and an herbalist that was from the St. Pete area, was asked to head up the department there and had a compounding herbal pharmacy that was the 5-to-1 concentrates as well as doing acupuncture. And I believe it was her and at least one other person half-time. She was full-time on salary, was asked to do research, was checking liver and kidney functions to ensure that they weren't causing any problems with any of the herbs, and really I thought was doing some cutting edge work. It was really amazing, and she was lecturing out, so it was really nice. I hate to say it, as hospitals tend to do, or teaching facilities do, they chase the money and the grants. And so when the budget cuts came and the grants didn't come through for a particular thing, they cut that part of the program out, which was very sad. From what I understand, it was very, very well received by both the patients as well as a lot of the medical staff there. So I don't know if that status has changed. I haven't talked to her in a while. I'm sure I'll see her at the FASOMA conference in August. So the reality is, outside of China, you're not going to find anybody who's got a lot of experience dealing with somebody who is in either a vegetative state, and I believe he said it was acute brainstem trauma. And so that specifically, if somebody falls on their head and gets cerebral or brainstem damage, I'm going to say go to the hospital. That's always the right choice. Don't come see the herbalist or the acupuncturist then. And it's unfortunate that we are not able to come and at least attempt something when there's little to no hope. And all of that said, herbal medicine, as well as acupuncture, but I'm going to say herbal medicine primarily, is phenomenal for acute care, for traumatology. And it's not really taught in the acupuncture schools. A lot of herb schools have a great focus. People like Seven Song, Corey Pine have such a big emphasis on first aid care and frequently provide first aid care. I don't teach enough first aid, but it's one of my favorite things to do is working festivals and events and providing first aid care. And you never know, like it can be anything from spider bite to an axe wound to stage 4 cancer. It's funny, I'm going to be out at the Orange Blossom Jamboree no, actually on my birthday, May 19th, and I think this year I'm actually going to be able to stay out there and provide some first aid care out at Orange Jamboree. So if you're out there, come by and say hi, and I'll throw an herb at you or an ear seed or something. And that said, when we're in a situation like that, there also has to be decisions where, like, we might help stabilize somebody, if they're conscious and so forth. But when there's somebody's going into a coma for any number of different reasons, there are some great benefits to Western care, and that's a time when we're going to transport that person as quickly and as safely as humanly possible to a higher level of care than the herbalist. Yes, Corey Pine, he rocks. He was supposed to be down here actually this weekend, and he wimped out on me. He could have gone canoeing with me today. His loss. So how can you help somebody like this? And one of the hardest things is consent is a challenge. So how does he provide the doctors in this hospital the opportunity to even attempt something that the doctors would consider unconventional, unacceptable, and so forth? And there was a time when we had that was when I was a preteen, actually. Karen and Quinlan, I forget the case that was down in Sarasota where somebody was Terry Schiavo. Huge controversy, and poor woman was in a coma, and there was fights over, do we continue to keep her hooked up to life support? Do we discontinue life support? Court cases, and people were entrenched in either side for a variety of reasons, and all of it was very sad. Nice. Yes, I will see you at Medicines of the Earth. But the reality is, I printed out some living wills, and I put them out on our counter for many years after that, and encouraged all my patients to create a living will. And basically, it says, what are your wishes should you not be able to communicate? And it's super appropriate to say that it's that you approve the use of herbs, acupuncture, and any alternative methods be attempted before discontinuing life support, or even if you continue life support. All of those things are appropriate to put in there. You certainly would have to go through the hassle of getting some sort of hospital privileges. But those are very doable if you can find somebody who, like acupuncturists who practice herbalism, an acupuncturist, and I've gotten credentialed to go into hospitals and nursing homes. It's a pain in the butt, and I can get temporary privileges in those places as an acupuncturist. So there's lots of both Western and Chinese herbalists who have license that may get them acceptable in a particular facility. Once we're there, is there anything we can do? I don't know. In China, I hear stories about blowing rhino horn up people's noses with a straw and coming out of comas, but that's illegal to own rhino horn. So you got to do water buffalo horn now. And those are in cases of extreme heat. There's different reasons in Chinese medicine why somebody might be in a coma. The hardest one is when they're in trauma. So are there herbs that you could incorporate in food? Potentially, and I'm going to say hypothetically. If there's a feeding tube and you were allowed to provide certain foods through a feeding tube, and people weren't in a coma, they were conscious and able to give consent, but I have provided food and herbs through a feeding tube to people in the past. And that can be gastro or a port in their stomach. Both are fairly common, and in some ways kind of easy way to get herbs because you don't have to think about taste anymore. And so you can use some really strong herbs that way. It is also possible to provide, hypothetically, medicinal meals in the form of bone broth and soups. And if I were looking at, obviously we need to know what medications they're on so that we don't counteract any medications they're trying to use. But there's some very powerful food herb out there. In particular, I'm thinking gotu kola. Centella asiatica would be a very interesting thing to make a nice green soup that could be provided through a port. Honestly, when I saw that text message from that person, that was the first thing that came to mind. I would not use ginkgo biloba. That has very specific parameters and is a potential blood thinner that could be detrimental. So I wouldn't go to all of the classic turmerics and things like that, because those could have an adverse event if he's already on blood thinners, which is very possible that they put him on blood thinners to prevent anything, depending on the different types of trauma that he has. There's other herbs, and again, I would say there are some traumatology formulas, like Mayway has the Great Mender, but there would be contraindications with certain prescription medications with that. He may be on anti-seizure medications, and those are very narrow therapeutic margins that we have to be careful of, changing how those process through the body. And the other approach might be topicals. And so things like comfrey, although I don't ever encourage taking that internally because of the PAs in there, topically it is very effective and good for reducing swelling, traumatology, broken bones, things like that. And I forgot about that. So that would be a good answer topically if that's possible. And you could actually probably get permission to provide comfort and care to somebody in a coma by providing them a sponge bath. I want to wash their face and head and comb their hair. That would be very normal to do with somebody in a coma. And so if you happen to use a strong infusion of comfrey water to do your bathing in, and do that around the closed wounds, no open wounds, that might be an interesting approach. And I thought of this as I was saying it. A common combination is Solomon seal, which I generally consider a food herb that's very powerful, would do well in that gotu kola soup, and mullein stem and root, not the leaf, is effective for trauma to the neck. I use both the stem and the root in this case. Doctor of Signatures opinions vary on which one is best, but you could put both in there with some Solomon seal. And again, I would do that with permission and double checking the med list. There's also acupressure that you could do. I would say most of it below the knee, so if there isn't injury to the legs, you might do some gentle massage. Again, with ask, literally say, hey, my friend likes massage. Is there any reason I can't do gentle massage on their legs? And see if they will give permission for that. Don't say it's therapeutic, I'm going to do acupressure. You say that, they're going to say no. If they say you can do massage, sure, go for it. You might also look at St. John's wort oil as a topical. So you cannot do internal St. John's wort. I'm quite sure they're on many prescription medications, and St. John's wort internally will interfere with basically half of all over-the-counter and prescription medications. But topically as an oil is very, very safe. So that was a heavy one mid-river. And I hate to say it, I was contemplating that as I paddled down the river and tried not to run into things. And I will say, for those of you in the area, the Little Manatee, I still like the Hillsborough, was actually really nice. So if we get stuck doing the little manatee, I'm going to be really happy because there's a few plants there that I have not seen on the Hillsborough River. It's just, I don't think it was as pretty. And about the same difficulty level, actually, than in both. So there was, what do I got? I got half an hour left, basically. I was going to say, if anybody's got any questions, otherwise I'm going to go on some old ones here that I was going to dive into. And I think I'm caught up on everybody's questions. I could have missed things on the chat because I am doing this solo tonight. So I've seen let's go with a light one. We just did comas. Comas are not a happy thing. I know. You're going to have a blast, Brandy. It's kind of like the camping trip. It's very different. We're not doing that same kind of cool stuff. But it's usually one of the highlights for folks of the whole program. I did not. I may have missed it, or Trisha may not have given it to me. Kristen, feel free to type them in or copy and paste if you can. Because I can't jump off of here. Sorry, I thought I had a tick for a second. I can't jump back and see my emails. But I'm going to talk about something. I just read something from one of the suppliers. And it's a common problem after, having an apothecary and a dispensary for herbs other than cannabis. I have all of the herbs except for that one. There's always some interesting things that come up that as consumers we don't think about, and sometimes as practitioners we don't think about. And that's our supply lines of our herbs. And although we try to source from small organic biodynamic farms, even here in Florida and throughout the country, the reality is they can't keep up with supply unless they only give them to us. And for places that, live north of Florida, there's a time when you can't grow certain plants. We have annuals and perennials. And so trying to predict how much of how many thousands of pounds of a plant do we need to plant to meet the needs of their consumers can be really challenging for a lot of these farms. So we actually have a number of small and large suppliers that we work with. And they get their herbs, and this is true of every herbalist, unless they're out wild crafting their own herbs, that's the only ones they use. But we work with such a diverse set of herbs, from the hundreds of Chinese herbs to the Western to the Ayurvedic. Some of those come from China and India, of course. But even for the Western herbs, the European and North American herbs, many of those are grown not locally, but they're grown overseas. And so a lot of the big supply houses are still working with organic farms overseas. But crazy things like COVID made sourcing plants hard because everything got slowed down. So there were delays. For staff to come in and harvest and dry product, for truckers to carry we're not the only herbalists in town. And so they're sending tons of herbs from some of these farms, even the small ones. They're dealing with hundreds, if not thousands of pounds of herbs that are shipped. So those are trucks that are having to come and get that. And COVID, that wasn't happening. But then there's crazy things like we didn't get herbs from China a couple of years ago because of the Olympics. There was a threat of some terrorism happening during the Olympics, when I think it was the Summer Olympics in China. And so all highways in and out of Beijing were kind of shut down. No trucks were allowed in or out. And so the supply lines were greatly impacted. One of the companies we work with in Canada, 3 years ago, it was a mail strike. And so everything got delayed by a month or two. Now there's a trucker strike, I think. And so things are delayed again. And so what would take 2 or 3 weeks is now taking 6 to 8 weeks. There's also, when there's a typhoon or a hurricane in some place where the herbs come from, we may not get it. There's some increasing typhoons in the South Pacific. So guess what? That's where kava and kratom comes from. So there's oftentimes delays based on weather patterns. And one that a lot of people may not, obviously, as we hear about all the horrible things that are going on in Ukraine, it's actually already affected the herbal supplies. And so we are finding that that Ukraine is a huge, it has many industries and important industries, one of which is growing medicinal herbs, as a lot of those Eastern Bloc, because they have a lot of very fertile soil, labor tends to be cheaper there, but they have good supply lines. There's good truck and train and airports. A lot of medicinal herbs, a lot of the European herbs as well as the Western herbs come from those areas. And so we've seen as we're going into the spring planting, there is some urgent cries for a number of herbs from those areas that we're going to see some real shortages come, even if the war ends right this second, because there's some planting dates that should be met. We're going to see some real delays in or absence of some of our very common herbs, or we're going to have to develop new supply lines until that country is able to recover. And of course, as countries shut down, India was very heavily hit with COVID. So things like ashwagandha, between over harvesting and now under planting and a lack or a reduction in the workforce to do it, we're seeing even things as boring as ashwagandha are having some issues. So it's one of those things where, like right now, we're seeing one of our favorite sources, small farms, is Osha Farms, and just super nice people. And we were running low on calendula, and some of our big suppliers were out of calendula. We didn't like what we got, and so we actually composted some of it we got from one supplier. And so we contacted Osha Farms, and we're like, don't you have any? Because sometimes, you build a relationship with your suppliers. You're like, come on, what do you got in the back corner you're hiding for yourself? Come on, hook us up with a pound or two. And they were like, well, we still got some of our stuff, but it's not as good. And we were like, we'll take 5 pounds. And they're not so good, looks better, smells better, and is better quality than our stuff we get from some of our big suppliers on any day of the week. So we love some of those suppliers who are so picky and so quality control conscious that these aren't quite up to our usual standards, far exceed the standards of others. So we have calendula. It's important that we recognize that throughout the season, we'll actually see a change in the quality. Obviously, once the last of the harvest in September, October, sometimes even November, is gone, now we're working on supplies. And so as we go into springtime, like right now, we're literally seeing the oldest product out there. And so there will be a change in how people's infusions taste. And you sometimes have to increase your dosing as you go into this part of the season until our first spring harvest starts to show up of some of our annuals like stinging nettles and calendula and so forth. As an herbal dispensary after all of these years, it's really fascinating trying to be predictive of how we're going to need to source as a retail source, and trying to get just the right amount so that we don't end up with a lot of older stuff that we have to throw out as the new, fresher herbs come in. So it's always that fun little balancing act, because we want to make sure that we're always putting out the best medicine out there for folks, and without wasting our money either. So, all right. Well, I appreciate the Reader's Digest. Let me see if I can get to some of these, Kristen. So, the NAC, it's been an interesting controversy, and I understand the NAC is, I don't know that it's specifically because of COVID they've gone after it, because they'd be going after an awful lot of stuff. that one's been kind of on the FDA's radar for a while, and it's gone back and forth a few times. And there has been a bit of an outcry about it. And so far, I'm going to say I got scared. Not that I use it a lot, but I'm like, anytime they're about to take something off the market that I don't believe is dangerous or adulterated, I'm like, oh, heck no. The second they make that unavailable, I'm going to need that for somebody. So I bought a bunch. And I can safely say, although it's generally very safe, I don't use that supplement a lot, and it got a lot of play in COVID. But I'm going to say there's so many effective herbs and supplements, and just keeping vitamin D levels in the optimal range is probably sufficient from people getting severely ill. There's I would say, a significant amount of research on that. So the NAC was one that, honestly, the FDA started to go after, and then one of the pharmaceutical companies kind of got involved in it, tried to slap a patent on it, and got in a little fight. It happened to kind of come to a head as the FDA was trying to crack down on a bunch of products. And because there was some talk of the NAC for having a benefit for both COVID prevention, treatment, and especially long COVID, there was more talk of it for long COVID. I think it got a lot of hype, and I'm glad, because I think the FDA ought to keep their hands off of plants. This one's a supplement rather than a plant, but one that has long been in the market, long considered safe. And there'll be ongoing fights about that one. And my guess is the FDA will lose that one. I've had a few of the American Herbal Product Association has made statements. The Herbalgram, the American Botanical Council, even though that's not a plant, I think they even came out with a statement. But I think there's some good information. There's a couple of other ones that I follow that have made statements and looked at the facts and history about the acetylcholine. And I don't think the FDA has a leg to stand on, and that's been the general consensus of the industry. And we have to be careful, and this happens a lot. Yes, there's an issue. Yes, the FDA made a little bit of a threat. The industry and the professional organizations of the industry kind of went after them with facts. But there were a number of people who sold the product who created a lot of fear around it and the vital importance for our survival. Is people will die if we don't get this, that created a run on the product. And so there was a period of time from some of my supplement suppliers, there was like a month I couldn't get it because of this huge run on the product and a increase in pricing. And so I sometimes wonder whether that's people manipulating the market, trying to make a fast buck. So yes, we need to constantly watch the FDA and all the other stupid organizations out there. Like, they provide benefit, but at the same time, they're a pain in our butt. But there's also a lot of people who are creating hysteria when it's unnecessary. And so going back to original sources, going to our professional organizations rather than talking heads. And really looking at what those statements are, looking at the actual factual history, rather than, I hate to say it, whether we're talking, choose your media source, or you're talking head. There's a number of them out there that tend to cry wolf a lot. And so Don't ever take your eye off the ball on that. Always keep an eye on the watchdog organizations like the FDA, who does have a history of making some bad choices, but they also do a lot of good. There's supplements that I know were adulterated. I've actually turned into the FDA. Of course, they didn't do anything. It's still on the market, but whatever. So that's like, honestly, I'm like, yeah, we got it on the shelf. It's easy to find. The prices have stabilized again, and I don't expect it to vanish. All right, I got to catch up on the. Sorry, got to go faster here. It was also mentioned that it was used for help with liver damage. Yeah. I've heard of it being used for liver issues. I've heard of it being used for COPD. I would say generally it's used for repair of tissue, reduction of inflammation, and it's part of, when we start to look at the citric acid cycle, and there's a bunch of different cycles when we look at the functions of the cell, when the liver's breakdown of substances and excreting, getting rid of some of it as waste, and other of it goes into these cycles. B12 is part of that. That NAC was part of that process, and so we tend to, I hate to say it, there's huge, we all talk about CoQ10. Well, there's other coenzymes, and we talk about methylcobalamin, the B12, but all the other B vitamins have a role in all of these different cycles. And so the supplement industry they pull a different thread and make a product. If we look at, what is it, 5-HTP versus, I forget, there's a bunch of different supplements all along that chain of the creation of serotonin. And so each one is like better than the last because it bypasses somewhere else in the chain. Well, if your chain isn't broken, then it doesn't do anything. It literally doesn't do anything because your body's already working that part of the cycle. So for folks that have a hard time eliminating waste out of the liver, who have inflammation that's overwhelming the normal cycles, or have a dysfunction or break in the cycle where we need that particular chemical, then it's super helpful. And the nice thing is it's not generally considered harmful. And so not to say the herbal industry is got our halos and wings on, but the supplement industry, although I'm a huge nutraceutical pusher advocate, there's some shady crap in that industry where it's really about hype and marketing rather than vital necessities. I tend to go back to the stuff I learned when I was a kid. Vitamin C and zinc and B complex is magnesium. There are certainly things that I'll do beyond those, but those will take you a really long way in fixing a lot of crap. And those are, if you're not able to absorb zinc, we should be looking at HCl. We should be looking at stomach acid. And if your stomach acid's crapped out, then all of your minerals are crapped out. So fixing what's broke is sometimes more important. Sure. Time permits. What are your thoughts on subbing Lovage root for Osha root? Recently heard of this being done. Osha definitely does not grow in North Carolina. We should all be conservative with Osha. Osha is this phenomenal herb that only grows in the Rocky Mountains, from the Canadian Rockies down into at least Colorado. I'm not sure. I forget. I think it's like between 5,000 and 10,000 feet. I could be wrong on that. But it grows at altitude. Phenomenal bear medicine. Is Lovage the same? Nah. But there's there's always substitutions. And sometimes in order to get the action of one herb, we have to put 2 or 3 herbs together. So Osha is some phenomenal herb. It has many functions, but the lungs is probably the one I use it for the most. I can break off the smallest piece of root for somebody who's got walk-in pneumonia or chronic bronchitis, lung infections, and I have them just chew it until they can't stand it anymore and then swallow it. So I don't even do tinctures and things like that. I was like, here, I break it off, just eat this. You'll be fine in 2 days. And I lovage, and there's different species of lovage, some better than others. Any number of herbs, just depending on how it presents, that we might use for lung stuff. So it's rare to find a one-for-one substitution for that strong of an herb. Sometimes we can use same genus, different species, but not always. And so we have to be careful with making those substitutions. Lovage, luckily, is fine. It's a long use of it. Oh crap, what's the guy's name? Somebody, is it Cottingham? Actually grows Osha and will ship it out fresh, and nothing beats fresh Osha. And he has a very limited supply, but I think he lives in New Mexico. He's online. He's on Facebook. Sorry, I can't remember his name, which is embarrassing. I bought herbs from him before. I think it's Cottingham. Somebody, feel free to chime in there. Wait, who was it? Maureen, you were in Colorado. Score us some Osha. That's where you get it from. Okay, type his name in there so other people can get it too. I'm embarrassed. I can't think of the proper spelling of his name. So, yes, that's the guy. I was close. I can't remember my own name half the time. Oops. All right, we went through that. And we did that one. Ooh, I'm actually cranking these out. Yes, thank you. I like promoting, especially, he's not some huge mega company. He's just some guy going out, growing a few plants and wildcrafting a few and trying to keep his belly full. So those are usually good people. He's been at it for a long time. I don't think I've met him personally. But everybody says nice things about his products, and certainly the fact that you can get fresh herbs from him. If you don't know it, is there? Oh, that's super exciting. There's Osha and Durango. I've only seen it in the wild once. I was at the HG conference, and I think I found it. But it was already wintered over, so I was seeing just the dead flower, and I wasn't going to dig any up. I did score a bunch of mullein out there, but I didn't dig up any of the Osha. I wanted to get it in the right season. I don't know him. Well, I'm writing that down. I've heard that name, but I don't think I've ever bought any product from him. Desert tortoise. There are many small companies out there, people trying to do good work, and it's important that as a community we share those things. Nice. Yeah, I'm sure Paul will be out there. Are you going to the Good Medicine Convergence, Maureen? I've never been, just heard it's very different kind of herb conference, so I'm totally jazzed about it, and hoping the weather's warm. Because I'm definitely a cold weather wimp. But yeah, we've always got to make sure that we're sharing those people who make good medicine, that do a good job. It's always scary. Oh, nice, good. Well, I'll see you there in person then. One of the things that's always challenging is when we get, we either go out and wildcraft stuff ourselves, or we find somebody who's growing or wildcrafting plants that if we're going to get those, not only is that person hoofing around, working their butts off, trying to, get the best medicine, using good wildcrafting practices, but then they have to get it back to the post office and overnight it. So you have to pay for that overnight shipping. That doesn't come, so we're paying for their sweat and labor, as well as the overnight shipping. So sometimes people don't appreciate how expensive fresh tinctured herbs can be. Like we get the actual milky oats, we usually order 20 plus pounds. We have to order it a year in advance from sometimes 1 or 2 different farms. And that there was one time there was a storm came through and there was a crop failure, and they were like, sorry, no milky oats for you. Another time it came and it had so many bugs in it, we just threw it away. It was just like, yeah, we can't work with this. And I know we just ordered a bunch of, we pre-ordered from Osha Farms, and one other farm, I can't think of their name. We just ordered a bunch of other things, again, pre-ordered 6 months in advance, at usually 20 plus dollars a pound or more, up to almost $80 a pound for some of them, to get those overnighted to us, so that we can tincture them fresh, because sometimes tincturing fresh is vital for it. And I recently got a couple of Chinese herbs that are being U.S. grown, and their first harvest is harvests of Banlangan and Danshen, the salvia mitts. I just got those a couple of months ago, and just stunning to see those fresh, to chew on them fresh, and then to tincture them up literally within 36 hours of them being dug out the ground, still with a little dirt on there. Even planted a few. I have heard of Rowan Berry, and I will be honest, I know absolutely nothing about it. I've never worked with it, nor have I ever researched it. That might be a good one to ask Corey Pine about. If it's in NC, I bet you he knows it. Oh my God, brain cramp. For any of you who, especially if you're in North Carolina, but if you're familiar with Mountain Gardens, that is a Western and Chinese herb grower / teaches classes. His place just burned down about a month or so ago, and I know there's a Kickstarter out there. If I can find it again, I knew I threw some money at it for him to rebuild it. It's where I get a lot of my fresh Chinese plants from that I propagate and sell down here. That his, and he is not a young man, and for him to lose his home is a really sad thing. That's been his life's ambition and dream. And if you want to go to YouTube, you can find lots of him walking around talking about his plants. I've learned a lot from both him in person as well as watching some of his YouTube videos. So he's got some good stuff. That's too big a subject. Let me say one last thing, and then I will allow us all to escape here. So there's been a heart disease I see all the time, cholesterol, high blood pressure, those are the things. I don't see a lot of people where they come in and I go, I think you're having a heart attack, you should go to the hospital. In the last month, I've had at least 4 cases of that, and it's a little traumatizing. In at least 2 of the cases, for sure, I was right. And it's always odd. I literally had a client call me who frequently calls us, sometimes very demanding, and we sometimes get, we all get frustrated. We're all human, and but as somebody who's trying to help folks, even if they're being a pain, and we've got to listen because sometimes they're telling the truth. And literally, this woman has a number of issues on her right side of her chest, but she's called up and said, I'm fatigued and I have pressure and pain in my left arm. What should I do? And this woman has had a heart attack in the past. I believe she has a pacemaker, if I remember right. I literally said, I think you're having a heart attack. And, this is just on the phone. You should go to the hospital. And she refused. She called her cardiologist and did the same thing, who said, you should go to the hospital. She went to the walk-in clinic, and they said, you should go to the hospital. You're having a heart attack. So, it's important that as herbalists, it is not outside the more you do this, the more scary things you see. And it's not a bad thing. I think because we take a little bit more time, we should be as well versed in cool, energetic stuff. But there's an importance to knowing and recognizing the warning signs of when do we refer out. And I'm going to say that, sorry, I'm going to show my age. The whole Sanford and Son grabbing the chest, it's the big one, is not normal for heart attacks. We were talking about this, and I think it was the physical assessment class the other day. And I was talking about this, and like 3 people was like, oh yeah, that's how my mother or father or significant other had their heart attack, was they were fatigued, maybe sweating a little more than is average, and maybe felt a little tingling in their arm that they couldn't explain, that it was mild. Heart attacks are the leading cause of death for women. Women tend to experience little to no symptoms of a heart attack. They're birthing babies, so a little discomfort is nothing. And so men tend to have the anvil heaviness on the chest, the shooting pain to the shoulder, arm or jaw, extreme neck pain. Women tend to get fatigued. I'll just lay down. I just need to relax for a minute. They might get a little sweating or some weakness or discomfort in their arm, shoulder, or neck. So much more mild symptoms for women. And I think it's important to recognize as herbalists is like, it would be way too easy to say, oh, maybe you're catching a cold, maybe you're stressed, you need an adaptogen, when sometimes it's super appropriate to say, hey, maybe we should go to a walk-in clinic or go check out the ER and just get checked out and make sure, because that can go on for a day or 3 and then you're dead. So it's one of those things I would encourage you all to review what those symptoms look like and review it specifically for women. If you can spot it in women, it's easy to spot it in dudes. And too often we write it off as, heartburn. That's the other one. A little indigestion is a really common symptom with all of that. So I will encourage you all, yes, study all your cool herb stuff, but in this day and age where stress is a pandemic, I think that for whatever reason, I've seen an increase in heart attacks, and I hate to say it, a dramatic increase in cancer of late. The last 2 years, I'd say almost a quarter of my patients are dealing with some aspect of cancer, everything from stage 1 to stage 4 to preparing for chemo, radiation, or surgery, or dealing with the after effects of that, or choosing not to do any of those treatments. And I've been at this for a long time, and it just seems like, I don't know whether detection and testing has improved, or people are starting to seek out more than they did. But very mainstream kind of folks are coming to see me for some really scary stuff of late. Well, I'm going to leave it at that and wrap it up. I have no idea what the next, what is it, April? We're in March, yes. So whatever the last Friday in April is, we will do this again. Feel free to send in any questions that you have. We'll post the event if it's not already up there and share it about. And I will go and find your questions that I missed earlier. Sorry, I was Between on the river and packing up for an event tomorrow and getting ready for 101, I think somebody missed it. And we'll get those plant questions next month. And please, I hope we see you in one of our classes. Remember, all of our classes are both in person and online, that we're on Zoom. And we'll even, if it's an herb-related one, we'll ship out herbs to you so that you get to taste along with us. And everybody gets the recording of those classes. I think we keep them active for 3 to 6 months or something, depending on the class. So please, I hope we see you in those. If not, we'll have a crap ton of amazing plants that we're preparing for Green Thumb Festival. And everybody better make it for Herb Day. Well, okay, if you're in Colorado, I understand if you don't make it, but if you don't make it to our Herb Day, create Herb Day in your own image in your town. It can be as simple as giving a free lecture or a walk, or creating the extravaganza that I seems to grow more and more every year. So if you're just tuning in, please check out all our cool classes on traditionsherbschool.com. Follow us on our YouTube page for the Tradition School of Herbal Studies, or check out the clinic and all the cool services we offer at acuherbals.com. I'm Bob Linde, and I'll see you whenever the heck I'm on here again doing this again. I've got to go get ready for an event in the morning, and then I'm teaching Western Herbal Medicine 101 tomorrow morning and Sunday. So good night, all. Thanks for tuning in, and share the recording with your friends on YouTube so I can get lots of followers. Bye. All right, how do I turn this off? I don't know. Ha ha. There it is.